As announced, the title of the paper is an analysis of motivation and situational interest in a location-based augmented reality application. My name is James Raber. I'm the Associate CIO at Kent State University, and I was very fortunate to get to work with Dr. Ferdig, Gandolfi, and Dr. Clements on this. So just a little bit of background. So on May 4th, 1970, it was a very tumultuous period with protests across the United States concerning the war in Vietnam. It was relatively impactful for Kent State, for marking kind of a historical significance to calm down the protests. The National Guard was dispatched to the university, and as a result, fired into the crowd of students, killing 4 and injuring 9. So we recently had our 50th commemoration of the event, and faculty at the university received a grant from the National Endowment of Humanities to launch an AR experience. And it's really designed to guide viewers through 7 key locations that related to the events leading up to, during, and after the events of May 4th. And it was a web-based augmented reality application designed for smartphones. Basically, what it does is you go to a defined location, hold your phone up to it, and it overlays content pertinent to that location. And it provides audio commentary as well and other supplemental materials. So the group that secured the funding, a part of that was our Research Center for Educational Technology. And we know that augmented reality can be an effective tool to improve teaching and learning. However, research is relatively limited beyond just knowing whether or not it's effective or not. So why is it effective? So, peeling back the onion a little bit, interest and motivation have shown to have a positive impact on learning outcomes, yet little, if any, research is available investigating interest and motivation as it relates to augmented reality. So just a quick note, I'm using the terms interest and motivation, and it's important to note that they're related constructs, but they are quite separate. So interest is really early stages of exposure to a subject matter. Developing interest, fosters a willingness to learn more and revisit a subject over and over again. And motivation is an innate desire to master a subject. So kind of going back a little further or a little deeper, with interest, there's really 2 types. There's personal interest, it's something that is innate to an individual, or you have situational interest. This is interest that occurs as a result of an environment or context, context. So you might have some seductive details. It's something that raises your eyebrows. Oh, that's interesting. I want to learn more about that. So studies have been done on interest, and it reveals that it does create a very significant relationship to educational outcomes. So people that have an interest in a subject have faster recall. They tend to retain that information longer. And to further describe situational interest, there's been research done to create a model around that. And the current thinking around that is a 3-factor model, where you have triggered situational interest, basically those details that create engagement. And then you have the maintained situational interest feeling, so how you feel about a subject matter, and value, so whether or not you find usefulness in that particular subject matter. With regards to motivation, there's multiple kinds. There's extrinsic motivation, where you might be inspired to do something out of reward, right? So you're going to work hard because you want to get a promotion. But when it comes to learning, intrinsic motivation is far more impactful. It's where you see something as having personal value. It contributes to happiness and enjoyment going through the learning process. So Keller described intrinsic motivation under what he referred to as the ARCS model. So the ARCS model, basically, it's a construct that has kind of 4 key components: attention, relevance, confidence, and satisfaction. So basically kind of those are the things that make up whether or not, a level of a person's motivation. And to analyze motivation, he produced what's called the IMMS, which is the Instructional Materials Motivation Survey. It's a relatively lengthy survey, around 36 items. And because, as I'll kind of talk through when I get to, how we conducted our study, we're going to be looking, we wanted to analyze situational interest, we wanted to understand motivation, and we also wanted to understand knowledge retention when engaging this application. the survey was getting quite long. So to avoid things like survey fatigue, which is a thing that does happen, right? People will just kind of get bored answering a bunch of questions and just straight line all their answers. We wanted to shrink the questions down. So we did find an instrument called RIMS, which is a reduced instructional materials motivation survey that reduced it quite a bit, down to 12 items. So we did use that for our study. So our motivation and goal with our engagement is to really develop an understanding of what is the impact of a user's motivation when using an augmented reality application that's designed to provide content around an historical event. Similarly, what about situational interest when using that augmented reality application? And what can we learn about knowledge acquisition? Looking at a number of meta-analysis, there's lots of studies out there around a variety of subject matters, but when it comes to history, it's relatively light. So we created a study. We had 33 participants. We did a pre-test and post-test approach, where we, through the pre-test, we tried to understand, people's interest and motivation around the subject matter and their knowledge. We presented some instructions on how to use the application. And being that this is a location-based augmented reality application, we walked through the map. So this, the location where this happened is outdoors. It's a very large space, and there were several, there's a total of 7 locations that we wanted people to walk through. So after we've conducted that, we asked our participants to go through the tour twice. The first time through a very defined path. And when you look at the actual application, the rationale for it is because there is a bit of a chronological order between understanding the events of May 4th. So we wanted people to really kind of understand kind of what happened leading up to it, during, what are the key points of interest, and they had to visit all locations. The second tour, no defined path, they could visit any location that they wanted. And then following that, we did a post-test, again, measuring their interest, their motivation, and their knowledge levels. So here's a few screenshots of the actual application. So you can see here that the camera displays the actual location as it is now, and then it overlays historical imagery over top of it. And then it also plays an audio commentary telling about that location and why it was important. It also presents supplemental information. So if a person wanted to learn a little bit more, you could do so. And then it also talks through those locations, not just the day of, but there are historical things that happened after the event that that are certainly of note and worth reflecting on. And then this bottom graphic, that is the actual map. So you can kind of see that there is a defined path to really understanding the events. So our findings, overall there was significant change in the relevance component, which actually decreased from pre-test to post-test. And that was a little bit of a surprise. Although when we start looking at why this is the case, looking specifically at the items that were asked, the questions are really focused on the utilization of the application and not necessarily the subject matter. So I enjoyed, working with the app, that I was stimulated to keep using it. The information was arranged where it could help my attention, that sort of thing. And when we talked with participants, they did report that there were difficulties and errors with wayfinding. So that probably had an impact on their motivation levels. And it's worth noting that the field overall, so augmented reality application development, lacks instruments to measure UX in an AR application. Such an instrument like that would have probably helped create a much more engaging and motivating exhibit. And it's probably worth noting that while the findings were a little bit of a surprise, this is consistent with earlier studies on augmented reality applications that weren't necessarily historical in nature, but where people using an application that does augmented reality augmented reality content, that if they're not intuitive or if they're buggy, then it creates cognitive overload. So it is certainly a thing to sort out as you're developing and building out an augmented reality application. Related to situational interest, we did indicate that we did learn that there was a significant change. Specifically, there was growth in maintained value over pre-test and post-test. There was growth in the other two components, but from a statistical perspective, they weren't significant. So had we had a larger population size, we probably would have gotten a larger p-value and validated those on a more significant matter. But it was encouraging to see that the value component did go up pretty considerably. Knowledge, by and large, this is one of those things where the survey questions probably could have benefited from having either additional participants, greater review of the actual questions, because we did demonstrate that there was knowledge growth, but it was only statistically relevant in 6 of the 10 questions. You can't just look at the survey as a whole. You got to look at it kind of item by item. So to me, the refinement here is that if we were to continue this survey or continue the study, that we probably want to take a look at that instrument and refine our questions. But that said, the fact that we did measure growth in those spaces was positive, and it was consistent with analysis of other AR applications that did measure knowledge growth. So some takeaways: there was further evidence that AR can be used for knowledge acquisition and improvements in situational interest and historical empathy. It highlights the importance of understanding interaction design and its association with motivation. And determining your knowledge level of the audience is critical in developing content that is both relevant and stimulates new knowledge growth. I think that was one of the things with that assessment. Pretty much every student coming to Kent State does learn a little bit about the events of May 4th. So trying to introduce new knowledge to them can be a bit challenging. Also, from a technical perspective, augmented reality needs to be easy to use. It needs to be as intuitive as possible. It needs to, if it's location-based, providing proper guidance on where someone's going and when they get to that the location is very, very important. And also, people expect that the content should be high quality. The audio needs to be clear. The imagery has to be very robust. There's, looking at, a lot of the users of augmented reality applications have roots in doing gaming. So, they have an expectation that having high fidelity is just part of the equation. So making sure that your content is good and has high fidelity is really important.
Actually, the question, it might be my missing out of something, but when you were trying to identify if there was some kind of add-on in the situational interest, you were able of identifying it was a little higher. But were you able of at some point relating that, even if qualitatively, with the experience, with an enrichment and engagement and enrichment of the experience with AR? Were you able of at least detecting why it was slightly higher?
Yeah, absolutely. So one thing that was not necessarily revealed within the article, but so when the roots of this research was actually part of my doctoral dissertation, and there was a component of qualitative analysis. So I did talk with 3 of the participants in some depth around what they got out of it, and from a value perspective, which is the component that grew. They felt a greater connection to the students that experienced those events, which because it became something that was perhaps in a textbook, perhaps something that was talked about during an orientation period within their course, to something that's like, oh, those were my peers. Yes, it was 50 years ago, but I can find myself in those shoes.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you. Those testimonials, and that engagement was also with testimonials really gives you, that was what was missing in what you just, thank you very much. Thank you for sharing. Yeah.
Absolutely.